So I think we can start, Karin. So.
Yes. Yes, we're live on Facebook, and I will start the recording now.
You are on mute, I think.
Oh. Can you hear me now? No?
Okay, but let's start. So, welcome everybody to the second webinar, Introduction to
Can you hear me
ICD-11.
now?
My name is Robert Jakob. I'm Team Lead Classifications at WHO. We are transmitting live from WHO headquarters in Geneva. And you see here online the members of the team, Ms. Al-Sokun, Ms. Sugai, and my colleague Nenad Kostanchik. The webinar is the second of a series, and there will be more webinars focusing on specific uses of the ICD, also together with its companion classifications. We will be repeating some of the basics in relation to ICD that you may or may not know, and then this time focus a little bit more on content of different chapters. We will talk first of the content. We will have a second presentation on the tools, and then there will be time for question and answers. Please, when you have questions, use best the Q&A part and not the chat, because then we are sure we don't miss the question and we can be sure that we answer. Any housekeeping from your side, Karin?
Can you hear me now?
Sorry, you're still without sound.
Okay, it's okay.
So we go ahead. Okay, good. So what you see here is the start of the presentation with a QR code, because ICD-11 has become a fully digital code. And if you point your mobile phone on this QR code, you will be pointed to the page where you find all the content at icd.who.int. Just as a background for those that don't know ICD, it's a health classification that has been around for about 150 years, that ensures production of comparable statistics nationally and internationally, and was in principle something that ensured interoperability at a time where people didn't even know the word. There have been 11 revisions, the last one adopted by the World Health Assembly in 2019. And just to give you an idea, some 70% of the world's health expenditure is allocated using the ICD, and 60% of the causes of death in 112 countries, the number is continuously increasing, are reporting causes of death coded with ICD. Not to say that there are publications linked to it, guidelines, and ICD-10, for example, has been translated into 42 languages. For ICD-11, some 20 languages are underway. ICD-11 means innovation. ICD is a legally mandated health data standard and comes into effect from January 2022. It's an internationally agreed data aggregation standard for health. However, the innovative part in ICD-11 is that it now allows the lossless clinical documentation. It's an integration of terminology and classification, and it's designed to be linked to other terminologies that may have developed for other uses. It also integrates core terminologies of WHO, and we'll see to this more. The other thing is ICD-11 allows multiple translations on the same platform, so we will have more comparable multilingual data collection, and essentially comes with an end-to-end suite of tools that allow end users to easily access the classification. Finally, an important point is ICD-11 means updated scientific knowledge. ICD is not alone. It has companion classifications by WHO, one for functioning, the ICF, and one for interventions, the ICHI. And interventions includes the medical interventions, public health interventions, functioning interventions, and also diagnostic interventions like laboratory. All these different classifications use what we call extension codes that allow to add detail. And there is the related classifications and terminologies that allow to look at the data from different angles, for example, for nursing or for family practitioners. And as we see in the bottom, of course, there are links to other systems possible, like human phenotype ontology, the MEDRA, and some others. The overall picture is the one that you may have seen several times, but we continue to repeat. You record once, you encode with one of these classifications, and then you use the data in multiple ways. So that's the dream. You document once and reuse multiple times. And of course, in population health, we have the sustainable development goals. But on the clinical side, for example, we have guidelines like in mental health, or we have administration that is using this for billing, for example, for DRG systems. And we are developing one now that can be used with the ICD and the ICHI, so that countries that are moving to ICD-11 would have some tooling already for their countries. Now, all this in mind, the ICD-11 has been designed accordingly to have all the detail that is necessary for this whole range of use cases. And so causes of death certainly is one prominent use cases, but at the same time, we can record clinical terms. It's suitable for surveillance. You can do functioning assessment, can use it in primary care and cancer registration. And in many of these uses are already in practice in early adopter countries, as we will see later. ICD-11 also is more than diagnosis. ICD always has been more than diagnosis. You see on the left side what is in green. It's injuries, signs, symptoms, findings. It's reasons for encounter of the health system and its external causes of illness. And now we have added chapters on traditional medicine and functioning assessment. But on the other side, we have our extension codes, part of which also has been existing in ICD-10, and now they have been systematically structured. And you see here, we have anatomy that you can use to define more in detail where the fracture of a bone occurred, laterality to say which side was affected. You have infectious agent and a structure that allows to record antimicrobial resistance. We have the histopathology of tumors included. We have the medicaments, the international non-proprietary names, and the devices. These are all terminologies maintained by WHO. And finally, we have mechanisms of harm, activities, places, objects that also had been part of ICD before, but that have been expanded based on experience with injury research. ICD-11 has more relevant detail. And what does this mean? So we have 17,000 statistical categories that are based on 80,000 entities. And with the synonyms, this makes a total of 120,000 terms. And with the intrinsic logical structure of the ICD, the coding tool is able to understand more than 1.6 million terms for coding purposes, giving you single codes or code combinations. So what does this then mean actually? It means that the 17,000 categories are this what you see here in the circle, and then there is a red line. That is the line of entities that don't have a statistical code anymore by themselves. They only have what we call a URI, that's a computable string that allows to still identify them at a level of detail so that you can document them if you want. Otherwise, you just aggregate it automatically to these categories on the top part. And if we then look at the ICD-10, for example, there you have only 2 coding levels. There is no notion of any electronic foundation. You just see here a list of categories, and then the index is separate, paper-based, the rules are separate. And ICD-10 was really a statistical system imposed on clinicians, whereas the ICD-11 has become a clinical system for statistical use. This is one of the biggest differences. And what does this mean under the surface and this kind of shoreline and foundation? So here we see the line of the things that were still in the circle. So we have the codes, and then the rest is only documented with a uniform resource identifier for computerized system. Normally you wouldn't document this on paper to that level of detail, or at least not code the information. All these things here have a definition, classification properties, instructions on how to do code combinations, and many other things that allow essentially the search engine to be intelligent and help in finding the best possible code. And the result is that we have this kind of knowledge network, an ontology you would call this, that is underpinning what you see on the surface in this kind of browser coding engine, and that is rendered by this block in the bottom that's called application programming interface, that essentially has a language independent layer and a language dependent layer, so that the information entered on one side can then get responded to with all the content of such an entity. Now, this thing here allows to plug any software application on top of the ICD-11 that uses the ICD-11. And of course, this whole content is available offline and online for wherever you want to use it. And we talked about post-coordination. So here, for example, you see code combination. If somebody is keen to add to the malignant neoplasms or the cancer of the nasal cavity the detail that it was on the septum, well, you will find the codes to encode this if you want. The same, if you want to be very specific about what kind of cancer was this, you can search here and you will then find the tissue type corresponding to the cancer that you want to document. This is particularly useful for cancer registries, for example. Now, then ICD-11 allows to retain keeping clinical detail. I show here the Spigelian hernia. It's a rare one. You want to preserve it. Other specified would be the code that would be lumped to, and this is frustrating. But you can choose the specific term Spigelia hernia for the record. And how does this then work? Well, if I have an intelligent documentation system, an electronic one, it can retain that the code was DD5Y other specified hernias, but the specific URI of the Spigelian hernia was something else that has been statistically rolled up to there, so that in your electronic document, you can have both, and then the physician is happy as well as the statistician. And then, of course, you can get effortless additional information. These are the structures that reduce the amount of training that you need. You see here, for example, acute respiratory failure. You see here a J and this plus sign. And the plus means that there are additional instructions. The J means special coding for maternal cases. And then if you click on this, you see, if this was a maternal case, this is the code combination to use. And for post-coordination, it tells you, hey, you are not supposed to use this code alone. You please also tell what caused the respiratory failure. And if you click on this, it will open the browser and you can find the disease that you were looking for. Now, looking at the overall structure of the ICD-11 from a statistical point of view, it still has 26 chapters. The external causes separate from the reasons for encounter of the health services. We have a chapter for maternal and neonatal or perinatal cases. We have the general population and the whole subdivided by these different organ systems and etiologies. What is new is certainly the chapter for the immune system and a chapter for the blood have been split, and the implications we will see later. There's a new chapter on sleep-wake disorders, and one for functioning assessment, one for sexual health, and a chapter for traditional medicine conditions with exclamation mark. We are not having therapy there. The ICD-11 means simple use. And here we see an example. So you type the diagnostic statement into the coding tool. You may see a word list that allows you to refine this statement if you want. And however, the first match in the destination entities list is normally the one that matches what you were looking for. And you see here, cancer of stomach is happily converted in malignant neoplasm of stomach, unspecified. So wonderful, things are done. Coding tool finds the best match. Now, what happened with the coding scheme of the ICD-11? Well, the chapter numbering is with Arabic numbers, not Roman numerals anymore. Less and less people actually speak Roman, ancient Latin. The coding scheme for the categories is shown here. There's a minimum of 4 characters and a maximum of 2 subcategories. Always in the second position, we have a letter that makes sure that this can be clearly distinguished from the codes of ICD-10. We are not using the letter O to avoid confusion with the letter 0. We are not only using the capital L to avoid confusion with the number 1. And the first character always relates to the chapter number. and starting with a 1 and ending with an X. The residual categories still are Y and Z respectively. And there's a special coding scheme for blocks that is not shown in the browser and in the coding engine, because this would be essentially only used for tabulation. So this is visible also in the print files as well as in the data files that are provided together with the standard browser. And that means block level 1, 2, 3, 4, up to 5 levels in some instances. And then it starts with the code of the first category that is in this block. So in this case, we can say that's block level 2 of chapter 1. And A0 looks very much like the first block, first entry in this part. What changed in the different chapters of the ICD? So ICD-11 still allows to report main infection syndromes without mention of a specific agent, for example, diarrheal diseases. Influenza has moved to chapter 1, prion diseases moved to the nervous system. Antimicrobial resistance is not in this chapter, but in a different chapter, but it's designed in a way that in the context of infectious diseases, you will be shown the option to code separately the antimicrobial resistance agent and what kind of resistant it is. And this is in line with the Global Antimicrobial Resistance Surveillance System, or abbreviated GLAS. We have HIV stages now. We have a new definition of sepsis, just to mention a few highlights, and here showing you, for example, antimicrobial resistance options. We have here the different types of tuberculosis, some of which you can code more detailed than shown here. And on the right side, you see the matching antibiotic-resistant mycobacterium options that are given. And so the current ones are here, but the other would allow to add any kind of other combinations there, so that when in the future the pattern changes, we can still live and expand the system as necessary. In the Neoplasms chapter, the histopathology has been added to the pure anatomy. We have now finally codes for basalioma and for melanoma. The concepts of unknown and uncertain behavior of cancers have been split into two unique categories, because uncertain behavior is a specific behavior of a tumor cell, whereas unknown really means we don't know the behavior. Nobody has told what the behavior is of the tumor. Then the general hierarchy is really behavior. This means really benign, malignant, uncertain. And then come the broad sites or body systems, and then we have some histopathology added. However, there are exceptions to this. So we have the neoplasms of the brain and central nervous system, as well as the neoplasms of hematopoietic system, that are taken out of this hierarchy. Why? Because neoplasms of the brain can kill you even without being invasive. There is no space they can expand to when they grow in your brain. And the neoplasms of hematopoietic tissues, the opinions are changing frequently of which ones are benign and which ones are malignant. So the use of the data becomes really difficult, as this is changing on an annual basis eventually. And with this move, we can be sure we don't miss out and we get comparable tie lines. The third exception is the malignant mesenchymal neoplasms that can essentially occur everywhere, but where the first level is specific, the tissue type of the mesenchymal tumor and not the site. In the immune system, that is the new chapter. This was previously, a part of it was part of chapter 3 in ICD-10. And it has the things that we are listing here, of which, for example, the non-organ specific systemic immune disorders, or the NOSAD, were previously part of the musculoskeletal system and well hidden there, but they have the same mechanisms like autoinflammatory disorders, allergies, and other things. In mental and behavioral health, we have new structures. We have alignment with the DSM-5. We have the gaming disorders, much discussed, and the gender incongruence has been moved out. And at the moment, the guidance on diagnostic guidance for mental health diagnosis is being added to the system. A nervous system, we have more clinical restructuring, more clinical detail. And as we said, it has received the chapter, the prion diseases, they are rare, but it has received the cerebrovascular diseases. This will increase a lot the number of cases related to the nervous system. The coding options for stroke, just to give an example here, now are, you can code the stroke by ischemic, and then large vessels, small vessels, and specific causes. And then, for example, showing here, you can use the laterality, so which side and whether one side unspecified, and you can choose the artery. And this looks very complex, but if you go to the coding tool and you type in what you would do, left stroke of the left anterior cerebral artery, by occlusion of the left anterior cerebral artery, the coding tool will automatically show you the matching things, put in square brackets the other information that is there. And if you click on this, it will show in gray these codes. And if you have an IT system, it could just transfer this into your system and you are done with the coding. So no need of searching in separate lists. For the visual system, we have also more clinical detail. It has been reorganized. A lot has also been added to the findings, to injuries, to tumors, and to some functioning aspects of the eye. Of course, injuries and tumors and findings are in these chapters and not in the visual system chapter. Circulatory system, the heart valves are no longer dominated by rheumatic fever. We have new distinct higher level categories like diseases of the myocardium. We have reorganized the whole arrhythmias following new knowledge. We have a subsection on pulmonary hypertension, and the myocardial infarctions are now subdivided by STEMI and non-STEMI, so ST elevation, and no longer by where they exactly occur in the heart. Finally, for example, for the chronic vascular diseases, you can now choose which severity you want to use, either Rutherford or Fontaine. All these severity scales are available if you want. Respiratory tract, we can say specific infections have been moved to chapter 1, to the infectious diseases to better reflect the infectious nature of these conditions, and developmental respiratory diseases have been moved to the developmental anomalies in chapter 20. Cystic fibrosis has moved in here. The entries in the chapter have been systemized a little bit more. And as I said earlier, the chapter has lost the influenza. It moved to chapter 1. Digestive system, more detailed anatomical groups, better ordered from the mouth to the anus. And we have more recent clinical detail included, like eosinophilic gastritis or esophagitis. However, important digestive disease groups have been grouped together, so gastroesophageal reflux disease or also the ischemic digestive diseases, the hernias, they have remained together independently of the sorting order. Disease of the skin has been totally reorganized. There were entries that suggested that probably the last real update was made in 1948. Accordingly, the chapter has really changed enormously. We were lucky to have this input by the relevant scientific society, and essentially it's a fusion of American, British, and German work on dermatology confirmed with an international working group, so that now dermatology shows what dermatology is today. Diseases genitourinary system has been complemented with missing information, and you see here a whole list. I'm not going to read this one. So we have female infertility and male infertility and many other elements that pertain here. Conditions related to sexual health is one of the new chapters. So it has sexual dysfunctions, gender incongruence, so a range of conditions that may or may not need contact with the health system, that are neither mental conditions nor organic conditions, and that's why they are here in this separate chapter. For pregnancy, childbirth, or puerperium, essentially we have specifications on early pregnancy loss. We have a new section of obstetric hemorrhage. We have more detail regarding the duration of the pregnancy. However, everything that was there has remained there. Developmental anomalies, that was formerly malformations, has changed quite a lot, because here we really have the structural developmental anomalies, and main groups are affecting one body system, multiple body system connected to chromosomes, and then things affecting the intellectual development. Finally, we have external causes of morbidity and mortality, where we have removed some of the detail that it was not usually reported, and on the other hand, aligned the detail between the other intents so that if the intent changes after inquiry, you don't lose detail by moving it from, for example, from intentional to non-intentional. All this detail that has been removed, of course, can be added using extension codes, and then you can document every fancy thing you like or you need to document. Land transport accidents actually now are regrouped to match the high-level reporting scheme, traffic, non-traffic. This wasn't the case in ICD-10, that you had to pick the different categories in different places. Finally, there is this totally reshuffled, reorganized, redone section on healthcare-related harm that has been totally overhauled for modern reporting purposes, following also the WHO schemes. And we see here, for example, you can code complications, say the mode of injury here would be a surgical and medical device, implant or graft. It's an orthopedic device linked to this, and what did happen, so failure to osseointegrate, and you can document these things if you want and if you need. Changes with impact at code or grouping level are, as I said earlier, influenza, specified meningitis and pneumonias, as well as acute rheumatic fever moving to the infectious diseases, cerebral vascular diseases moving to the nervous system, and then several signs and symptoms that were hidden in the organ chapters now happily moved to signs and symptoms as to not blur the data. And finally, this change for brain tumors and tumors in the hematopoietic system may provide some change in the time series. What did not change is really maternal cases remain maternal, same for perinatal, same for injuries, same for tumors. So this remains there. Also, the mortality rules have kept their intent. And looking now at the patient's path, we can document all these things clinically if we want. So the person gets worried and feels sick, then goes to the practitioner that finds an infection, then it gets worse and we find out it's a COVID-19 case, and then the family members are checked. So you can code all these things happily with ICD-11, and of course the therapy or the code diagnostic test using the health interventions classification, and then you get all the data that you need for planning of prevention, epidemiology, resource allocation, and all the other uses you want to make of the data. Of course, the case can continue. A near incident occurs on the intensive care unit. Recovery requires physiotherapy and fitness improve. Person is back to work. And voila, we have the ICD-11 in combination with the classification of interventions, and for physiotherapy also functioning classification to document and track these cases. ICD-11 also means participation, so it really empowers patients, healthcare workers, clinicians, and public health experts to participate in the design and an improvement of the system, and essentially to improve care and improve use of resources. And this is done with the maintenance platform, with a transparent public process, where essentially everybody can submit a proposal, provided evidence is given that, and rationale is given that this is relevant and that is true. And then this goes into a verification process that looks at structural aspects, at medical scientific aspects, and also at the different use cases and their impact and its impact on these use cases. And there's a summary review will then come with a recommendation to implement or not, or request some changes or more information. Being asked about what is mandatory for coding. Now, the use of combination codes and sophistication in coding depends on national setting and legislation and needs, and whether you maybe are in research or in some low resource primary care setting. So the mandatory use are chapters 1 to 25 and a minimum detail of 4 character categories. And optionally, you can use more detail. You can use the extension codes, traditional medicine diagnosis, and do functioning assessment. The mandatory rules for coding are specified also in the reference guide that is available online. Suggestions for improvement, please submit them to proposal mechanisms. And if you have questions, just send something to ICD@WHO.INT. On what terms can you use the ICD-11? So ICD is a global good, as are the ICF and the ICHI, that is produced by WHO for countries, and WHO, the Secretariat, and the member states, the World Health Assembly, that's what's WHO, and it's a legally mandated standard. So ICD and its partner classifications are available for Creative Commons attribution, no derivatives license, with a few clarifications in the context. This will be published online with a new release that is coming next week. And translations, by the way, are coordinated by the relevant ministries of health and are subject to the same terms of use as the version published by WHO. So it means if you have an offline version, it will have all the translations included that were available in the system at that time. And here is the example of a multilingual classification element of the ICD-11. You may have seen this before, where essentially you search in one language and you can then see the results also in the other language. Chinese and Spanish is available. French and Russian will be coming this year. And some, as I said earlier, 20 more countries are in the loop. ICD-11 comes with a whole set of tools for your users, some of which you have seen already. And my colleague Nenad in the next presentation will show you outlook on these tools, respectively their integration in systems. And with this, I should conclude and say the ICD-11 is a global good, maintained by international regulations, improved and refined by you, by global contributions and feedback for comparable data, reliable, easy use, and interoperability. Thank you very much. So I think we will continue now with the second presentation, and then there will be some 15 minutes for question and answers. I will see to address some of the points that you're making in the question and answer section, and what remains then we will address in the question and answers openly at the end. Over to you, Nina.
Thank you. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yes. So in this second presentation, we would like to give you an overview on the tooling environment of the ICD-11 and also to reflect on some of the implementation efforts which are ongoing. So in terms of tools, let me start by this comparison, contrasting ICD-11 with ICD-10. For those of you who are in this webinar who are coders, they will know that for coding with ICD-10, the starting point was the volume 3, the alphabetic index, and from there you were then appointed to the use of the tabular list. This was done manually. In some countries, it was done also through facilitation with electronic tools. In ICD-11, we are using the ICD-11 coding tool, which is doing this job. So coding is very much enhanced through this tool, which brings you from the diagnostic statement to the matching ICD-11 code. And there are a lot of features which we will explain in more detail. Okay, I'm just hearing that there is no...
No, we can hear you, Nenad.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a problem on Robert's mic because he told me that there's no
Audio. Yes,
I think you can hear me. Okay, excellent. So then just to build on this, in terms of capturing detail on diagnostic information with ICD-10 and ICD-9, you see here in the ICD-10-9 world, in order to get from the diagnostic statement, you had to use, at instances, commercial software, which was doing this job for you, or interface terminology, or you had to rely on really good trained coding experts in doing manual coding, sometimes using a rather complex rule base. Now, with ICD-11, that has changed significantly. And you see here, basically, the decision which you had to go through in order to get to the correct code for a rather simple statement like end-stage renal failure. If you type this into the coding tool now, you will see that you get immediately a full match with it blue highlighted. So the system is recognizing that, in that case, renal failure corresponds to kidney failure, and it is indexed as under this respective category. So it becomes a rather trivial exercise in this particular example, and it just highlights the ease of use thanks to the availability of these coding tools. And even if you move on to more complex statements, for example, this one where you have the use of an acronym and infection, another complication, which is the diabetic chronic complication. In ICD-10, this was the Dagger asterisk convention. This was used to get to this code combination. And here you see that also the coding tool is enabling you to identify this very easily, and it's automatically indexed. So you get even to this code combination by just using this Google type of search in the tool. What makes this possible is a number of smart search features which are running in the background. So you have, for example, the system is recognizing similar words, spelling variants, it understands synonyms and other features which you see listed. We also have features which you very much know from any kind of use of browsers like Google or Edge, where you have a word completion list. You have a dynamic search, which is based on a matching score. So there is an algorithm in the background which is intelligently listing the results by their relevance. And you can also then filter them further if you wish, either by relevance or also alphabetically, if that helps you more. Now, in terms of the coding tool versions, there are two important distinctions we have. We have the orange version, which is the maintenance version, where you find all the new agreed proposals integrated. If we are launching new features, you will also see them first there. And then once a year, we are releasing an official release version. As Robert mentioned earlier, the official one is coming up just in a week's time. And this will be released as the blue official release version. Now, we also provide tools which provide crosswalks from getting from ICD-10 to ICD-11 or vice versa. So those kind of maps are provided after you have registered on the website, and you tap on the info tab, you will find the maps available for download. We have for translations a translation platform, so we are not using any more Word documents to translate the ICD, but this platform, which also allows to have, first of all, starting the translation with a translation memory from ICD-10, and then working through the translation with multiple users who are engaged in the process, or translators who are engaged in the process, who can collaborate on this platform simultaneously. When it comes to training, we have an ICD-11 e-learning course, which is available. But we also, over that, have a platform which we call ICD Fit for coder training and self-evaluation, where you find posted term sets or even case scenarios for coding. All of them have been posted there with the gold standard included, and it gives the users possibility to immediately test how accurate they are in terms of coding these terms. And you see here some examples from a country where this was used, and you see basically that with minimum training, thanks to the use of these tools, you get pretty high levels of coding accuracy. I think in that respect, the results speak for themselves just after receiving a couple of hours of training. Another important tool to mention here is a rule engine, which we developed for automated coding for the selection of underlying cause. This rule engine is based on the ICD-11, the mortality coding rules, but also using some other rules like ICD-10, startup mortality, or so-called small rules. These rules are, of course, accessible to the machine, to the computer, to identify the correct underlying cause, but we also wanted to make sure that humans can understand it as well. That's why you find in the interface a statement which indicates, for example, in this case, that the correct code assignment or the underlying cause is the external cause and not the injury. And you see in this example, if you can read it, that the sequence was purposefully wrong. So the tool automatically spots that mistakes and makes the correct underlying cause of death code assignment. Now, we don't want to stop when it comes to the tooling environment with just the data entry and coding of the data. We also want to make sure that we have now, in a way, an end-to-end solution which allows to analyze ICD-11 coded data. Together with our colleagues, we upgraded the respective platform which is used for these purposes here in WHO, which is AnaCode. And the third version is now available and basically assists in doing this job of analyzing cause of death data. Now, all these tools are, of course, provided for end users for direct consumption, but in today's environment, it is very important to have also the ability to integrate all these tools directly into software application, irregardless what kind of platform is used. So you will find these, what we call ICD APIs, application programming interfaces, for easy integration in any kind of software application. And on the website, detailed instructions are given. Recently, when it comes to offline deployment of these APIs, they were available in the Docker version. We have now also additional services, Windows services and Linux service made available, which allow additional options for local deployment in the respective IT environment. And whether this is in a public or private sector setting, these can be consumed as an international global public good, as Robert alluded earlier. So when it comes to the digital infrastructure, we are really looking to create an end-to-end solution. And you see here the example of the cause of death reporting tools, which are now available in a way of a plug-and-play mode, spanning across the entire supply chain of data from the starting point of the data source and capturing the data to the quality checks to be performed, the data analysis, and then dissemination. And you see the relevant tools for this particular use case, which come into the picture here. And we are, as mentioned earlier, working also to have a similar end-to-end solution provided for other use cases, like, for example, mobility. Now, why does this matter? Because these tools are freely available. So whether it is for public or commercial use, they are disseminated as international public goods. They're easy to use, easy to integrate without the need for any kind of additional tooling. They are multilingual through the update and maintenance process, also future-proof. And the process itself is open, public, and very transparent. So it's really a suite of tools which together with the ICD offers mechanism in service of member state information needs. Now, to end with just a few reflections on the implementation process. So we consider some of these points as very important in order to start the process or to enhance and accelerate the process. First of all, a number of countries, which we call early adopter countries, basically followed these generic steps in setting up an ICD-11 task force or reference center to give a home for guiding the process of implementation or transition if they are transiting from previous legacy systems like 10 or 9. Of course, this process should not interrupt by no means the existing system. So we are talking about an incremental step-by-step approach which runs in parallel to the existing system. And once the new system is mature enough, then the transition will be made. It will be important to really set out a vision and formulate a strategy, to designate a project management team with multiple stakeholder representation, and to come up with a national plan for making this transition or implementation of ICD-11 We would recommend to start with the situation analysis, which is really looking at all the aspects of the health information system in terms of governance, operational aspects, the IT infrastructure, the human resource infrastructure, etc. And based on that, then to move towards a roadmap where, first of all, the value proposition is clearly identified from a country perspective, opportunities and challenges are identified, and then going through a stepwise transition process. We provide generic guidance in this document, which I have posted here, the Implementation and Transition Guide. And in the earlier slide, you already saw a roadmap by one of the member states outlining or operationalizing basically this document and putting into a 2-year time perspective. Now, countries are at the moment in different stages of their implementation. For all of them, of course, it involves raising awareness, familiarization with ICD-11, and then starting a process. Countries who are non-English speaking countries obviously start with the translation process and subsequently going towards piloting and testing in specific settings, etc., and then reaching the next stages in terms of scaling up. So just to give you a flavor of the different applications and integrations in the system, you see here the integration of ICD-11 APIs in medical certification and cause of death systems in Kenya and also Colombia. What you notice is that we are moving away from using ICD-11 as a drop-down list, but really integrating the coding tool in the respective data fields of the MCCOD form so that you can type Google-like the respective cause of death and you select from the suggested list of categories through the coding tool the correct code, and the system is guiding you in making these choices. Recently, we have also, together with our colleagues at the University of Oslo, developed a global solution of integrating the ICD-11 in the MCCOD form of the mainframe of DHS2, which is used in a number of countries, in particular low and middle income countries. In addition to the integration of the APIs in the system, this application also integrated the data analysis tool, Anacode 3, and has extensive possibilities to customize the features for the respective local information needs. And you see here some of the customization options. They can be specified further. And we are now starting in coordination with the respective ministries of health to implement this global solution in a number of countries who are interested in moving ahead with this. For morbidity, here's some examples also from Rwanda of integrating ICD-11 in the open MRS infrastructure, which they're using in their health system. And another example from the UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agencies, which is operating in the Palestinian refugee settings, which has an e-health application at primary care level. And it's a very good example of how easy it is now to use ICD-11 at primary care level. So they're coding the chief complaint, which brings the patient to the primary healthcare center, as well as the signed diagnosis. And these are medical doctors who are doing the coding in that case directly. But when it comes to implementation, of course, there are other areas outside of the traditional use cases of mortality and morbidity. One of them is here, an example in-house of using ICD-11 as a value set in the data dictionary for the COVID-19 smart vaccination card, which is currently developed within WHO and, of course, many member states. And here you see the value set of ICD-11 being used for the subtypes of the COVID vaccine, as well as for the vaccinable condition, of course. And finally, what are the reflections so far in terms of lessons learned? from our perspective, of course, it was critical to work in all these projects closely with our colleagues in the regional and country offices. Country ownership at the technical and political level is absolutely key. We also saw that countries who had challenges in terms of not having their own in-house IT infrastructure or open source IT infrastructure, but using proprietary systems, which often were ICD-10 or even ICD-9 based. So they were vendor locked in a way, and that posed challenges in making use of these in new innovations, which are now available with ICD-11. And that's why it is really important that the implementation efforts are also supported by ongoing digital health information strategies, initiatives, and the respective institutions. Another interesting lessons learned from countries who went ahead in terms of implementation is the very positive response from the clinicians. They really appreciated now that there is all the clinical detail they want to see. So it's not anymore perceived as a tool which is imposed to them like 10, but really a clinical decision-making tool with all the granularity they need. And that, of course, raises also the question and the opportunity to move coding closer to the point of care. And for those of you who are interested in terms of these clinician reactions, there's an interesting video from our colleagues from the collaborating center in Kuwait who reflect on the doctor's perspective in terms of ICD-11 implementation. And finally, we have seen that particularly in countries in low and middle income countries where sometimes the uptake for ICD-10 was poor or even non-existent, we see that there has been a huge interest and uptake, what we call non-legacy countries, and they can really leapfrog ICD implementation in terms of coverage and quality. So let me stop here and hand over back to Robert, and we are looking forward to your questions and comments. Over.
Let's check if Robert can hear us.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Perfect. So, Nenad, you may stop screen sharing.
Yeah.
And then let's go a little bit to the question and answers. So we're having a lot of questions about whether people need to be certified. Now, as you may have seen, the coding is easy, and from our experience with different trainings that were done, you can say after maximum half an hour of instruction on how to look at the coding tool, similar to a Google search engine, somebody who has no clue of health or medicine is able to code some 88% correct cases. So whether you need a certification in order to do the job of a clinical coder will essentially depend on your national rules and regulations, to which extent you really need to do this. Then there were a set of questions regarding potential Snomed linkage. That is yes on our to-do agenda. We are working with Snomed to make the necessary arrangements. Of course, this will require some resources and time to get accomplished. The crosswalks will be definitely done at the foundation level, so at the most detailed one, so that we have no losses of information moving from one system to the other, depending on the different uses. There was a question on the clinical modifications, and essentially clinical modifications have added the clinical detail that was retained to be necessary, number one, by clinical societies, number two, for the national case mix or resource allocation systems. In the production of ICD-11, we have reviewed all these systems, so all this detail that has evolved over the years is in the ICD-11, either as a single code or as a combination code, so it shouldn't be necessary to have clinical modifications. If, however, somebody feels the need to do so, they will be required to make this content also available to the international version so that others can take advantage of the same need. So this is what I memorized here. I think there was a question regarding the training materials. Do you want to say something to this, Nenad?
I think you answered it. I think it's clear.
Okay, Good. Yeah, well, how about the DRG in context of ICD-11? Good point. So as I was mentioning earlier, so we are working with our network to get a DRG system, so case mix system or case-based grouping system based on ICD-11, and in that case, EG, so the interventions classification, so that this would become easily available. There are synergies, and we'll certainly have some communications in the course of this year where this goes and how fast this will go.
And I can see one question regarding the focal point in the country for ICD-11. So just to be clear on this, this has been an official communication from WHO Director General to the respective member state and Ministry of Health. And we then rely on the response of the Ministry of Health to identify the respective person in the ministry who is nominated as the focal point. And it really depends from country to country who this person is. So I would suggest if there are questions in that respect by users, please feel free to contact us and we can point you to the respective focal point or unit in the ministry as much as we have received feedback to the letter, so that we can guide you who will be the counterpart in the country to follow up on some of these questions or points.
So main point will be this nomination will be a formal letter of the Ministry of Health to WHO in the way the official communications are done, because it's an official nomination.
There was a question about more specificity using ICD-11. Do you want to address this, Robert?
Yeah, I'm not sure. While I hear this more specificity of ICD-11, what I should answer, I can only say, look, go to the browser, browse this, search for the things that you want to be very specific about, and then see if you find it. Normally you should do, and if you don't, please make a proposal for improvement or send us a message. It's a bit difficult to answer this way. Then I see here an interesting question: what are the different uses of ICD-11 and Snomed CT? I'm not a Snomed expert, so you may ask there. You have seen the different uses of ICD-11 that we have mentioned there.
There's a question: do you think ICD-11 is more suitable for physician or surgeon to do the clinical coding rather than traditional coders in the ICD-11 era? As a surgeon, you must answer probably.
Well, it has nothing to do with surgery or not surgery. I think a few years ago, when you were doing scientific research, you were going to a librarian that would search for you the literature or tell you how to find the literature, and then it was quite a huge effort and you would have stuff. Now you go to the Google search engine, search Google Scholar, or go to the PubMed site and search the things by yourself, and usually your hit rates are good. Who's better, the professional coder or the clinician? The professional coder will know how to handle the classification better, probably will know how to extract the relevant content in the right way from a medical record. On the other hand, if the physician has to type into the system the diagnosis already, there's a good opportunity to have a small think opening and say, hey, the abbreviation that you're entering here can mean 3 different things, and these are the 3 different things. Please be specific about this, so that may improve eventually also the quality. It's a question that is not easy to answer.
There is a question about rare diseases updated in ICD-11.
Yes, so we are working with Orphanet to have all rare diseases included. Most of them are here. A few updates are still going on, and there will be also a crosswalk that includes the so-called Orpha codes, and that allows them to show some ICD content in the context of the Orphanet site, as well as maybe some Orphanet content on the ICD side, well noting that this is coming from another source, so there is no confusion.
And there's a question about the data. How will the data be aggregated for statistics, and how timelines in data will be aligned?
So you usually have some double coding studies that are done in transition times to see the impact of the new classification on old and new data so that you can see if there have been any shifts in frequencies. As I said, we have analyzed this for causes of death using the mapping table and the WHO database for countries that have excellent data. A big shift you see with the stroke that have been moved from one chapter to the other, cerebrovascular diseases. You see a little bit more signs and symptoms. These are the ones that come from the organ-specific chapters originally. And then you see a small increase of the infectious diseases, and for the first time you see diseases affecting the immune system. So that said, what was the other part of the question?
The statistics and how is the timeline, how will the timelines be aligned?
So that was the one, and otherwise for the statistics, that's how you would essentially do it.
Well, we're running out of time. I'm going to take one last question. It's about the low and middle income countries with poor internet connection. How will they capture the diseases?
That depends on their local infrastructure. We're experiencing that even very low resource countries are setting up electronic documentation systems that would allow to encode things at the place where the paper data is entered into a computer, and that would be probably the best way so that the clinical side doesn't have to deal with any of these classification issues like in the past. We are preparing a mobile phone version, and most people do have smartphones, so that would be another option to allow the coding. And in the worst case, there is still the possibility of printing a print version. We're having the relevant files exposed online and can do more if necessary planning to prepare a print file. But yeah, the question is to which extent it will be used. And also, then you need to get some extra training to be able to use these paper files. If you live in an environment that are using only a small set of diagnoses, the best may be to just get the list of diagnoses that you are typically coding and put them on a sheet of paper. That will make your life easier.
Okay, before we wrap up, I just want to mention that we're taking notes of all your email addresses and we're doing a mailing list. You will be notified for future webinars using the email. We also sent you in the chat, the Facebook and the Twitter and our classification page, where you can track all our updates and any new information that comes from our unit. You can also email us on icd@who.int for any additional information you might need. And we will have future webinars. I don't know, Robert, do you want to talk about the future webinars that we will be having?
Yeah, so we are planning future webinars that look at specific topics. So there is a possibility of really going more in depth regarding the uses. There may be one on patient safety, one on skin diseases, one on occupational diseases, and others maybe following some broad disease groups so that we can look into more detail there and have also a little bit more interaction than with this big overview that you are providing.
I think that's it.
Good, then thank you for joining us, and again, good morning, good afternoon, or good night for wherever you are in the world. Greetings from a rainy Geneva, from a cold Geneva, and hoping you are having a nicer weather or not too hot. Hopefully to see you in some of the future webinars. Goodbye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.